Hehmeyer. By trade, Chuck is a malpractice attorney, and there's probably a lot of irony why a physician like me would be friends with an attorney whose goal is to sue doctors, actually. I've actually had the privilege of being able to work with Chuck, actually, and what I've learned is that, well, I knew this already going in about Chuck. All you have to do is go to their website. Chuck is an advocate for children and families of children with rare genetic disorders. And what I've learned is probably the most effective way to affect change to help children and their families with rare genetic disorders is actually through the legal system. And Chuck, who is about the most modest guy that you'll ever come across, many of you remember him from 2 years ago, is truly an internationally recognized expert in the legal profession, particularly in the field of medical malpractice for children with rare genetic disorders. To give you an example, many of his cases that he's won have actually led to changes in the laws. Among other things, recently he won a case in defense of a child with a rare metabolic disorder that ended up being, to my knowledge, the largest medical malpractice settlement in the history of the state of Maine. So, bottom line is, you don't want to screw with this guy. You want him on our side, and he is an incredible advocate. Now, when I sent Chuck an email back, I think it was about January, asking him if he would come back, here was his answer to me. He said, referring to the time he'll be here, "We'll be 2 weeks into a new house. My wife is due to deliver a baby any day. The biannual Big Law National Conference is taking place in Philadelphia June 28th to June 30th. And you're requiring me to pay my own way to have to come out here. Sounds too good to be true. I'll do it." So by popular demand, we are really honored to have Chuck here today, and he is also going to welcome and introduce two of his colleagues who are going to probably lead the second hour session that will be more specifically relating to educational needs and how to get those resolved for your children. So, Chuck, we have a few things. First of all, this is a bottle of wine from a family here in San Diego, the Sulpizio family, who has their own private vineyard up in Northern California. And we have some t-shirts and gift certificates for all three of you. You'll have to figure out what size works. The gift certificates, I think, are all the same. So thank you. I'll put that down there. See, I think this is my copy, so you can't take that from me. And I'll get out of your way. Thanks, Chuck.
All right. Thank you. That was very nice, and the gifts are very nice. Thank you very much. It's really a privilege to come here and speak with you. I have spent the last 15 or 20 years representing mostly children with rare genetic disorders, and so I just can't tell you what a privilege it is to meet with you and to meet your children. And so thank you for having us here. I don't like to disagree with Dr. Grosfeld about many things, but one thing I have to disagree with is, I have to say, it's not my goal to sue doctors in medical malpractice cases. I have to disagree with that characterization, although that may be that may be the way that they see it. One of the reasons that I'm speaking here today is what my goal is for there not to be situations in which we have to sue doctors for medical malpractice. And so one of the reasons that I came out to speak today was because I wanted to talk about medical protocols, because it's a new thing for me in the last couple of years that I really want to talk to people about, because I think medical protocols are the most important thing from the medical legal system point of view that families with kids with genetic diseases can think about, because medical protocols, in my view, are one of the ways that we're going to prevent disasters from happening. So I really want to focus my comments on that. I have little confidence in my ability to work Dr. Grosfeld's computer, but so far the first thing actually happened. Specifically with Jacobson syndrome, it seems to me like the most serious and potentially life-threatening complications have to do with the
If I could just ask you to stick to the microphone, because this is being live streamed, so we need to.
Got it. All right.
Can't disagree with you.
All right, I'm being chained to the podium, I'm sorry. The platelet syndrome, Paris-Trousseau, which I know you guys are all familiar with. I know that you know a lot more about it than I do. I don't want to, try to educate you about that. But I do want you to understand that this is the thing that I think is the most important thing in terms of having a protocol. There actually have been cases out there where people with this syndrome have gone to emergency rooms and kids have died. And they've died because they've been, the Paris-Trousseau syndrome, the platelet dysfunction syndrome has been mismanaged. And I think that that could be avoided by simply using a protocol. I don't know, are any of you guys familiar with this case? It's called Summer versus Crozier-Chester Medical Center. Anybody ever heard of that? I know Dr. Grosfeld's heard of it. This is a case that actually happened in Philadelphia, where I'm from. I represent kids with genetic diseases all over the country, but my home base, my office is in Philadelphia. And ironically, the sort of leading case involving a patient with Jacobson syndrome is Summer versus Crozier-Chester Medical Center, which occurred in suburban Philadelphia. And in the Summer case, an 11-year-old girl came to an emergency room and she was vomiting blood. And you'd think that that would get people's attention. But in this case, nothing really happened. Nobody really investigated that and thought about whether that was related to this disease that she had and to the problems that she had with clotting. And long story short, she had a 2-centimeter stomach ulcer which was bleeding, and she bled out from that stomach ulcer and she died. She died in the emergency room after several hours there, and she died because nobody responded properly to the problem that she was having. She had just had spinal surgery at DuPont Hospital, which is in Delaware, right across the border from Philadelphia. In that surgery, she'd had to have transfusions totaling 3,500 cc's of blood, which was more than her estimated body volume. So this is somebody who, obviously could deal with, it was a problem, she had a bleeding problem, it could be solved. She'd lived through spinal surgery shortly before this happened, but because nobody treated her properly, she ended up dying. And I think that this case in particular highlighted the problem of kids with Paris-Trousseau syndrome or Jacobson syndrome going to emergency rooms and not having a medical protocol that explains the disease, explains the problems, and most importantly, tells doctors what they're supposed to do. I have this up here because I think that, you guys know better than me that when you have a rare disease, it's a rare disease, and by definition, people don't know very much about it. Now, you guys are blessed with having some of the great specialists here at UCSD taking care of your children, or you have specialists wherever you come from taking care of your children. But that's the exception, not the rule. If you guys show up at a doctor's office or a pediatrician's office or an ER or an intensive care unit, those doctors are not going to know anything about Jacobson syndrome. They're not going to know anything about Paris-Trousseau. Paris-Trousseau is going to be a French restaurant to them. They're not going to know what it is. And you really can't expect them to know what these things are because they're rare diseases. I looked out there, there's a brochure out on the table outside, and this is from the Sanford Cord Registry, CORDS Registry, the Coordination of Rare Diseases Registry. And they have talked about here there being 25 to 30 million people in the United States affected by more than 6,800 rare diseases. Now, we can't really expect doctors to know very much about 6,800 rare diseases. The great thing about medical protocols is that is the bridge between people out there in the community who take care of kids in emergency situations and doctors like Dr. Grosfeld, who are internationally recognized experts and know everything about a particular disease, in this case, Jacobson syndrome. The Summer case, I've written up here Dr. Google, because I thought the funniest thing about the Summer case in Philadelphia was this. This is an actual picture, this is an actual printout from the computer of a decision issued by Judge Savage in the case. And what this is a very short ruling where the judge said What happened was the doctor, the emergency room doctor who saw this little girl, she didn't know anything about Jacobson syndrome. She didn't know anything about bleeding disorders related to Jacobson syndrome. And so instead of calling an expert like Dr. Grossfeld, or calling an expert like his colleague here at UCSD, who's a hematologist, who's, knows everything about this, she got on Google. And when the case was going to go to trial in front of a jury, the defense lawyer representing the doctor was embarrassed that she had gone on Google and didn't want the jury to know that she had basically Googled Jacobson syndrome, and that's how she was making her decisions that day in this child who was critically ill in an emergency room. So the lawyer filed a motion asking the court to to prevent the plaintiff's attorney from giving the jury any information about the fact that the doctor had been Googling Jacobson syndrome. That's what this motion was. And this order is Judge Savage's order, which says, the motion in limine of the defendants, Crozier, Chester, and the doctor to preclude all testimony, comments, and statements regarding Dr. Francis Sandro's alleged Googling of Jacobson syndrome is denied. So in other words, the judge said, no, we're going to let the jury know that basically she was Googling Jacobson syndrome, and that's how she was making her decisions. And so I think that again, when we talk about protocols, you need to understand that if you come in with a rare disease in an emergency room without a protocol, you're being treated by Dr. Google. I mean, that's really what's going to happen. And so what Dr. Grossfeld has done in creating the protocol that they have created, which is on the 11Q website, is give you a resource to have whenever there's an emergency situation to prevent the Dr. Google thing from happening. Do all of you, any of you, have medical protocols for your family member with Jacobson syndrome? Does anybody actually have their own individual protocol? Okay. My question, though, is very specific. Does anyone actually have their own protocol that says, my son, Joe Smith on it, has their name on it, that's signed by a local doctor? Anything like that? All right. Well, that's why I came here. I came here to submit to you that maybe it would be a good idea to rethink that. And I'll tell you, and now we're going to talk about why. Because I have litigated several cases involving rare diseases where protocols either were or were not present, where disasters occurred. And so I really feel very comfortable now knowing how these protocols are used in emergency rooms and why they're important. And I would really like to talk to you a little bit about the specifics if we could. I'm going to go forward for a second. This is the protocol, the first page of the protocol that's now on the 11Q website. And this is a protocol that I know that I saw at some point, and I think is great. And I know that Dr. Grossfeld worked on it. I know that other people looked at it, and I know it's on the 11Q website now. And so don't get me wrong. I love this protocol, and I love the fact that this protocol is on that website, and I think it's a great resource. But I want to go back a little bit, and I want to talk about what I think you might want to think about doing differently. And I'm going to give you some case examples in a minute to back up what I'm saying. But when you have the protocol that's on the website now is not a protocol that is tailored to a specific patient. So if I go to the emergency room and I have Jacobson syndrome, and in the real world, if I'm in the emergency room and there's a doctor there, and I say, I have Jacobson syndrome, or my son has Jacobson syndrome, or my daughter, or my sister, or whatever, the doctor's going to go, I don't know anything about that. And then you can say, well, I'll tell you what, there's a protocol on the 11Q website, and I'd want you to look at it. And the first reaction the doctor's going to have is, I don't know anything about the 11Q website. I don't know that there's a remarkably talented woman who makes sure that everything on that website is accurate and up to date. I don't know anything about it. And I'm not going to make my treatment decisions based on some crazy thing that's on the web. Anything could be on the web. What am I going to do? Look it up on Wikipedia and make my treatment decisions based on Wikipedia? I mean, that's what doctors are sitting there thinking. They're going, oh, that's great, Missy. That's great, Chuck. Thank you for that. But, I went to Harvard Medical School, and I don't make my treatment decisions based on going on the internet. unless I'm at Crozier-Chester Hospital. And so, although I love the protocol on the website, and I think it's really important and it's great for it to be there so that doctors can turn to that and families can turn to it, I will tell you about a case in a moment where that exact situation did not work. And the child suffered a cardiac arrest and severe brain damage because they weren't willing to look at a protocol on a website that they knew nothing about. So what I would suggest to you is take that protocol, which is a great protocol, and take it to your family doctor. Take it to whoever your treating doctor is, your pediatrician, your primary care physician, your whatever, and say to them, this is the protocol that was drafted by the UCSD team, which is the best team in the world, but I want my own child's protocol. I want my own sister's protocol, whoever it is in your family. So what we're going to do is take this protocol and we're going to incorporate it. We're going to say, my son Joe Smith, it's going to say, this is Joe Smith's protocol. And we're going to tailor it to him. I mean, if Joe Smith has a protocol, when doctors look at things and they see, one of the first things they see is they talk about the protocol for heavy menstrual bleeding, and the patient's a boy, they start to think, well, maybe this protocol isn't really that specific. And so these are the kinds of things that run through their minds. And so what I'd like you to do is take this great protocol and take it to your doctor and have your doctor consult with these people if they want, whatever they need to do. Maybe they can incorporate it with a letter. But what you really want to have is something signed by your doctor in your community endorsing this protocol, either attaching it or redoing it so that it's got a new heading with the doctor's stationery on it, and it says this is Joe Smith's protocol or this is Jane Smith's protocol. She has Jacobson syndrome, and this is the kind of stuff. You can, it's okay to plagiarize in this situation, right? This is one of those situations where it's really okay. It's not like 5th grade when you're looking at the kid next to you. This is one of those things where it's really okay to steal. And you take that protocol and you get it signed by your doctor. Because if you're in Montreal in an emergency room, they don't know Dr. Grossfeld. I mean, they know UCSD is a big-time place and everything, but they just don't know it. They don't know the pedigree of any of this. But if you're in Cleveland and you show up at the Cleveland Clinic and you have something signed by a Cleveland doctor saying this is this kid's protocol, they've got to take that seriously. But they don't necessarily have to take it seriously when it comes off the internet because they just don't know. Now, some doctors are going to say, this is great, and I'm going to page Dr. Grossfeld. But some doctors are going to say, I don't know what this is, and I'm going to talk to the hematologist here at the hospital. And the hematologist here at the hospital doesn't know any more about it than that doctor does. So what I would like to see is I'd like to see a protocol tailored to a specific patient with the description of the disease that you find in the 11Q website, with discussing critical emergency management issues. Now, again, example, tailoring it to. So I know Dr. Grossfeld has shared with me that over 50% of the kids with Jacobson syndrome have congenital heart defects. Well, if that congenital heart defect has some impact on this child's life and potential care, then that should be incorporated into his individualized or her individualized treatment protocol. I'd like to see that in the protocol. If that's in some way going to potentially impact care that child could have in an emergency room, then let's not just deal with the clotting disorder. Let's deal with the congenital heart defect as well. Let's tailor the protocol to the individual patient so that we know that we get 100% bang for our buck when we have to use it, if we have to use it in that circumstance. One of the other things that I wanted to point out was, we need to also remember surgery and anesthesia. This is my little cartoon for the day. A lot of you guys know that when you go in for any kind of operation or surgery, then you need to talk to them about the clotting disorder. Unlike in this situation, in this medical institution that we have up on the screen, usually the surgery and anesthesia consults are not done at the same time. They're not done together. The surgeon and the anesthesiologist are not in the same room at the same time. Let your anesthesiologist know about this problem as well. Don't just tell the surgeon. Don't rely on the fact that you think that the surgeon's going to tell the anesthesia people. or that someone's going to tell them, when you do the anesthesia consult, let them know as well. So to review, I want the Jacobson syndrome protocol signed by a doctor. Now, the protocol on the website is signed by Dr. Grossfeld, but it's not an individual protocol for your individual child signed by your individual doctor. I'd like it to be signed by a local doctor as well, or incorporated in a letter. It could be a letter saying, I'm Dr. Hehmeyer, in Portland, Oregon. Attached to this letter is a protocol from the leading expert on Jacobson syndrome. I want you to follow this protocol, whatever, signed by Dr. So-and-so in Portland. And then when you go to the hospital in Portland, they're going to go, oh, I know Dr. So-and-so, and they can call Dr. So-and-so. They're willing to call local doctors. It needs to be dated, something that we were talking about, Paul and I were talking about before. Doctors, are funny, about stuff like this, and they see a protocol and it's dated 1988, they get a little bit nervous. Now, this protocol is dated in 2011 or whatever on the website, and, that's okay, but it's not good enough. When doctors are making medical decisions that could be life-threatening, situations, they like to know that they're relying on current information. One of the problems in the main case I'm going to talk to you about in a minute is the protocol they had was not only off the internet, but it was not recent. And the doctors were like, I can't deal with a protocol that's 5 years old. I just can't. I have no idea whether this is still valid. And so you need to make sure that your protocol is updated, I think, every year. It needs to be within a year, or the doctors aren't going to take it seriously. Because imagine if you're the doctor, if later on you've got some guy like me taking your deposition in a medical malpractice case, and I'm saying, so you did what? Why did you do that? Oh, you followed a protocol? What was the date on the protocol? Oh, 1998? Well, didn't you have something from the 19th century that you could use? Seriously, so they get worried about stuff like that. So get it dated, updated by your doctor at least annually so that they know that they're dealing with something current. Make sure that the protocol has paging number instructions on it. The 11Q protocol has the right stuff on there about paging instructions, but it won't have paging instructions for your local doctor. They'll be able to reach, Dr. Grossfeld or the people at UCSD, but you'd like them to be able to call your pediatrician or your PCP, because I'm telling you, they want to talk to local people who know, who actually know. I have a case right now where a woman, it's not, it's a different kind of case, but a woman went home from the hospital and she called a doctor who she didn't know. And she had this doctor write her prescriptions for things that ended up killing her. And this doctor wrote a prescription, and he never took a history, he never met the patient, didn't know anything about her. So you can imagine that he's in a little bit of a vulnerable situation. And it's the same thing here. Doctors who see your kids are going to want to call doctors who know your kid. And if you're not treating actively with Dr. Grossfeld or the people at the UCSD team, if you're treating with somebody in Sioux City, then have somebody in Sioux City, have their paging information on there so they can call and say, oh, I have Jill here in the hospital right now. And that doctor's going to say, I know Jill and I know her mom. I just saw Jill 3 months ago. I know all about her. And that's going to give them a really good comfort level that they're going to want to make the right decisions. A couple of things I wanted to suggest about the 11Q protocol that's on the 11Q website. This is an excerpt from a protocol from a metabolic. A lot of the kids I represent have inborn errors of metabolism. I won't get into the details of what those are, but this is a protocol from a hospital in Boston that has expertise in treating maple syrup urine disease, which is one of the metabolic disorders that I deal with. And one of the things I love about the protocol, because every time I see parents of kids with rare diseases in hospitals, I see them coming in and saying, you got to do this or you can't do this, and the doctors are going, yeah, right, yeah. You're a parent, and I'm a doctor, okay? And what I right, isn't that what they say, Paul?
We talked about this just yesterday.
So what I would like to see in the protocol, in the 11Q protocol and in your protocol, is this sentence right here that I've highlighted. Parents of children with switch out diagnosed metabolic disorders, parents of children with Jacobson syndrome know the signs or know the problems related to their children. It is important to listen to their insight into their child's illness. This is important because you really, you guys are like pioneers. You guys are like the people out on the wagon train. You're out there on your own with these kids, and you don't have a lot of resources sometimes, and you know more about this stuff than most of the doctors you're going to meet. So it's important that the protocol endorse that it says the parents know what they're talking about. Listen to them, because sometimes that doesn't happen. Obviously, you gotta modify this because this was from a metabolic disorder protocol.
Yeah.
But this is the idea. The doctor needs to endorse the notion that parents should be listened to. This isn't strep throat. This isn't something that you trained at and seen 100 kids like this in the last 2 years. This is something where you really need to use the parents as a resource. And if the protocol endorses that, you're more likely to be listened to. And a lot of you have really learned to be advocates because of the disease that you've had to deal with. But most of the parents that I deal with have had to sort of come to that slowly. Most of them are not, like me, naturally confrontational. Most of them are really polite, nice people that don't want to challenge doctors. And if they've become that way, it's only because they've had to by necessity. And some parents don't even get there even because of necessity. And so I like something in the protocol that endorses the idea that they've got to listen to the parent, because some parents just aren't naturally that good at saying to doctors, you need to listen to me and you need to do what I tell you. Some people just aren't good at that. It's not my problem, but I know some parents have that problem. And so this is the way to get around that. Now, I want to talk about one specific thing. Paul, this is on the protocol itself, this is one specific thing that I want to talk about that I really would like to change, that I sort of thought about as I was preparing for this. And again, I looked at this protocol, and it didn't really occur to me when I looked at it the first time. But as I've gone through some of the cases that I've dealt with, I think that I would like to change one thing. And I put this comic up here because doctors will be running tests on kids with Jacobson syndrome, and one of the tests that they run is a CBC. And when they run the CBC, they get a platelet count, right? And I have this happen in metabolic cases all the time. And if they get a platelet count back and the platelet count is normal, they're going to say, we got no problem. The platelet count is normal. And the problem is, as I understand it, and again, I'm kind of like a parrot up here. Like, Dr. Grossfeld says things and then I repeat them up here. So that's really what now that we're all in this digital age, it's all electronic now. It's wireless. So now Dr. Grossfeld can control me wirelessly. But it used to be that there had to be strings, actual strings. But the problem with platelets is that there are two kinds of problems. There's quantitative problems and there are qualitative problems. Quantitative problems means how many platelets do you have? Qualitative problems means what are your platelets that you have able to do? And as I understand this problem, in infants there's a quantitative problem which typically resolves or near resolves. But there is a lifelong risk of a qualitative problem. And if you do a CBC and get a quantitative result, that doesn't tell you whether you have a qualitative problem. So this is something that I think the protocol ought to emphasize. The risk for bleeding due to impaired platelet function persists independent of a normalized platelet count. I'm gonna go back. But I wanted to tell you why. I promise I'll go back. Okay. I wanted to go by and I wanted to tell you about the Craig case. okay? I called Jill Craig, who is Zoe's mom, yesterday, and I had her email me this picture because I represent her family in New Orleans. Now, Zoe has a metabolic disorder. She does not have Jacobson syndrome. But Zoe's, and I'll tell you now, I'm sorry to report that Zoe died because of malpractice in an emergency room. But Zoe's story is so relevant to what you guys have that I wanted to talk to you about Zoe and another little girl named Emily, because Zoe's story really relates to this issue. Do I really have to stand at this podium? It's like a...
We can give you the portable mic.
I'm kidding. So Zoe has a fatty acid oxidation defect. And I'm not going to give you the details of it. All you need to know about Zoe is, Zoe, when she gets sick, Zoe needs glucose. Okay? She needed glucose. And the problem with this disease was, you could come into an emergency room and have a normal blood glucose level, and you really still needed glucose to survive. And I won't bore you with why that's true, but just trust me, medically it's true. And what happened to Zoe is that Zoe went into an emergency room and her dad took her, and her dad, Chesley, is a great guy, but he's quiet, non-assertive. He's not like me, in short. And what happened to him in the emergency room is they took her glucose level, and it was normal. And he said, she needs glucose. And they said, yeah. She's got a glucose of 91. It's in the normal range. And they gave her IV fluids, they watched her for a couple of hours, and they sent her home. And when Chesley and his wife Jill woke up the next morning, Zoe was dead. And she was dead because she didn't get glucose. And I want to go back to this issue, is that I think that the protocol has to say, I don't care whether you have a normal CBC. I don't care whether you have a normal platelet count. You still need to worry about a bleeding disorder. Because if you don't say it specifically, the doctor's going to go, yeah, I could call the hematologist at UCSD. I could call this big shot Grosfeld, but I don't want to bother this guy. It's 11 p.m. on a Thursday, and tomorrow's the 4th of July, and I don't want to bother this guy, and I just did a CBC, and little Anna's CBC shows a normal platelet count, so I got no problems here. Well, maybe you do have a problem. And the protocol needs to say that the quantitative CBC result is no guarantee that this child doesn't have a qualitative platelet problem. So I really would urge you to think about adding to your protocol the endorsement of listen to the parents, and this is even, I think, more important, don't be lulled into a false sense of security by a normal CBC.
Can I get you to send that to my wife?
The Craig case teaches us that even if it's not your personality, you have to be assertive in an emergency room. One of the things that you have to do is you have to ask questions. Mr. Craig thought his daughter was getting glucose because he told them she needed glucose. But she was just getting IV fluids without any glucose, just electrolytes. You need to ask questions, you need to be assertive, you need to remember that doctors are not gods. It's okay to question them when your child's care is at issue. This is Emily. Dr. Grosfeld knows Emily well because he was an expert in her case. Emily has another metabolic disorder that involves a heart problem. And she came to an emergency room one day, and her parents did have a protocol. And let me tell you what happened. They ignored the protocol. And they ignored the protocol because the protocol came off the website of the Fatty Acid Oxidation Disorder Support Group. Sound familiar? Where a lovely lady named Deb Gould does her very best to maintain a website that has all the relevant information for kids with this disorder, not unlike that lovely lady right there. And the doctor was completely unimpressed with that idea, that he was going to be treating somebody with a protocol that was off some website that he knew nothing about. And so he promptly disregarded it. And he disregarded it because her glucose level was normal too, and her mom was saying she needs glucose, just like Zoe's dad did. And the doctor didn't know enough to know that in this disease, it doesn't matter whether the glucose level is normal, you still have to pound them with glucose. So, Emily was there for hours. She suffered a cardiac arrest. She suffered brain damage. And now this is a picture of Emily from this year, many, many years later. Her parents sent me this picture, and this is her graduating from school. But it's been a long, long road for her. This was Emily before her cardiac arrest. This is a picture that I carried with me in my wallet for 4 years while we litigated this case, because I wanted to remember, like what this meant. This is a picture that her mom saved because Emily, after this event happened, ripped up all of the old pictures of her. She was so upset because what had happened to her. So, I mean, these cases really, these protocols really, really can have an impact on someone's lives, on someone's life. Emily, to me, the lesson of her case is, in that case, they had a doctor like Dr. Grossfeld, a Dr. Rowe in Texas, who was the world's expert on this disease. And they begged the doctor to call Dr. Rowe. And they said, the doctor said, he asked the nurse to call Dr. Rowe. Well, when we litigated the case, the phone records revealed that no one ever called him. Use your cell phone. If they won't call, you call. You call. I guarantee you, if you go up to a doctor and you say, "Doctor, I have Dr. Grossfeld on the phone, who's the world's expert on Jacobson syndrome, and he would like to speak to you right now." What's he going to do? No, I'm not going to speak to him. I'm not going to speak to the world's expert on Jacobson syndrome. Even though I've never heard of it before today, I will not do that. He's not going to do that. He's going to take the phone. And once he takes the phone, then your problems are over. Because now he's talking to somebody who knows what he is doing. I also think that you guys have to pre-orient your primary care physician. You have to talk to them about the possibility that your child will be in an emergency room someday, maybe not even in your hometown, and that you're going to have the doctor there call them and let them know that's going to happen. Also, one of the things that we found out, what we were told in these cases by hospitals when they were like, well, I know that, we just didn't follow the protocol because it was on the internet. Why didn't you have the mom bring the protocol in with signed by a local doctor and put in her file in the hospital? I'm like, well, that's a good idea. You can do it. You can take the protocol that's signed by your local doctor and go to your local hospital and give them the protocol in the emergency room, and they will file it. And then when you come in, they can pull it right out, and when it's in their own records, they're a lot more inclined to listen to it. And so I would urge you again to think about doing that. Have it on file there. They're happy to do that. Because in reality, when you have a kid with a rare disorder come in and you don't know what the heck to do, it's really a relief to have this piece of paper saying, this is what you do and this is who you call. That was the irony of these cases that I did. I was like, why, if you were a doctor and somebody came in with, very long-chain CoA-acyl dehydrogenase deficiency, and the mom said, you got to do this. I mean, the first thing I'd want to do as a doctor is I'd want to call Dr. Rowe in Texas. I'd be rushing to the phone. And so it was very weird to me that doctors were resistant to do that. So let's talk about, we talked about on file in the local hospitals. I think you need to have a copy of the protocol. And I think it's great to have it on the internet on the 11Q website too. So all of those things are available to you. Understand that protocols are binding. If they are dated, if they are currently dated, and if they are signed by a treating physician, these are serious documents that have serious consequences, and a doctor will suffer serious consequences for disregarding a signed, properly dated emergency protocol. It will mean serious malpractice liability. It will mean liability in terms of their licensure. I mean, if a medical board investigated and had to ask, well, if this child had this protocol signed by her doctor, dated properly, and you didn't follow this, and this child died as a result, what, you know, I mean, that's going to have consequences. They're going to say, they're going to suffer discipline for that.
By dated properly, do you mean within the last year?
Yes.
What are we talking about for date here?
I think within a year. It doesn't have to be last week. You know, on the other hand, if you're expecting a problem, like a surgery or something like that, I think it's, you know, I think it's great to get your protocol updated, but it doesn't have to be that updated if you're in an emergency room. But within the last year, I don't think anyone could argue that that would be out of date if it was within the last calendar 12 months. This is sort of one of the things I wanted to end with. I recognize that a lot of you are dealing with kids. And I have 4 kids. I have 4 kids, and I have one coming in the next week or so. And I know as well as you do that once in a while your kids don't do what you ask them to do. I know it happens rarely, but once in a while it happens. And one of the things that I was going to suggest to you is I saw this article in the last month or so in the Philadelphia Inquirer. There's a lady in Philadelphia, and I know these are all around the country, that they actually have medical ID bracelets now that are like fashionable. You know, not like the old ones that, you know, we were used to, but they have all these like stylish kind of things. And at a minimum, you know, you might consider getting something really cool like that for your kid, because at least if you have that information on there, because you just never know where your kid's going to be or what's going to happen, and at a minimum, if they have a bracelet on that gives some minimum information, then maybe they can Google it, you know, and at least find out something. And so, you know, my experience with the metabolic kids who have the same situation that you do is that they really like these bracelets when they, you know, when they can get something really cool.
I was told not to get the ones that are decorative because the EMTs or people don't, when they see those, they don't look at them. So I was told when I got mine to make sure it looks like a medical bracelet.
You know,
That's just what.
it's not a perfect world, and you know, you're going to have to balance it. And I mean, you know, that may be true. My feeling was I just wanted to get them something that they would actually do. You know, that they would actually enjoy and it would actually happen in the real world. Because my guess is that, you know, that my kids aren't going to run around, you know, with a, you know, paper medical protocol, you know, or something like that. And so I thought that this was something that might work. But, you know, ask, I don't know. I mean, I don't deal with EMTs. Ask them, and maybe if they say this is a bad idea, then I'll take it off of my PowerPoint.
I was just going to say, the EMTs tell us the same thing. With Sarah, she has 2. She has this one, and even in different colors. But it has this, and it's very clear that it is. It's got green. She has the other one too that's around. She gets to choose which one. And they said that they would go with something like this. But like the ones that just look like the little cute bracelets, it's the same thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go.
Can you just repeat the point just because for the live stream?
Right. One of the moms here was showing people the bracelet that she has on her daughter, which actually has a. You want to come up and
This is mine. I'm special needs and Jacobson.
Great. So hey, show it to everybody.
This is mine.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's what I wanted. Hi,
Hi. How are you? I'm Chuck.
I'm Sarah.
Nice to meet you. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna. All right, Dr. Rosefeld, do you think that this is going to work?
Yes.
All right, let's see. Let's see.
Let me just enlarge it.
So the question is, what's on the bracelet?
We put that she's got thrombocytopenia, Jacobson syndrome, and also seizure disorder, and she has her name on it too. And she also, we put, I think, multiple medications, because we couldn't put, medications change all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And
They
does it-
also make where you can get little wallet cards, and they have the little USB ports that you can actually put like on a backpack or something with them too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be great. And if they have it, they have that, could you actually put a protocol on that?
Probably on a USB.
On the USB? Yeah.
And you can customize it, so it'd be easy to add, see protocol, and medical records,
Right,
or some indicator to have the
right.
service provider look at that.
And there's sometimes you can also have a number that they can call and they can get information.
Okay. I want to be, before I turn you over to the A team here, I wanted to talk to you about a little thing that Dr. Grossfeld and I are both feel very strongly about, and it is something that I think is connected to the Jacobson syndrome community. Over the last few years, they have developed a method that's very simple and inexpensive to screen children for congenital heart defects. It's pulse ox screening for congenital heart defects. Have any of you heard of that? So, and I know that this is relevant to your community. If you have a child with a congenital heart defect, one of the ways that a child with a congenital heart defect can be picked up is in utero with ultrasound, okay? Sometimes ultrasound screening will pick that up, but a lot of times it doesn't. And it may not because they don't look at those areas. Like if you have coarctation of the aorta, sometimes they don't even look in the ultrasound for that area, so they would never see that. A lot of times doctors will pick it up clinically after the child is born in the first few days of life because the child might have some abnormality, the sound of the heart might be abnormal, it can happen. But one way they can pick up these kids now is to take a pulse ox and put it on their toe and measure their oxygen saturation level. And if their oxygen saturation level is below a certain amount, then they know there might be a problem there, and then they can have a pediatric cardiologist consult, do an echo, and then they can pick it up that way. It's a tremendous opportunity to save some of these kids' lives who have critical congenital heart defects before they go into crisis. Right now, it's an opportunity that is being wasted in a lot of places in this country. And I really just want to talk to you a little bit about it and let you know that it's out there and let you know that it's an opportunity for us to advocate for kids because I am now getting cases where kids are being missed with congenital heart defects and they die from very treatable, surgically correctable congenital heart defects simply because they weren't identified at birth and the hospital wasn't using this pulse ox screening. Now, I tried to import a video into my PowerPoint, which for someone as technologically challenged as me is sort of like going to the moon. So we'll see if this actually works. But I wanted to show you, and Dr. Grossfeld can actually tell us what we're seeing here. But this is a video of a little boy in a case that I'm handling now, and this is a video of him several days before he dies. And he went 2 days after this to his pediatrician with the mom complaining that he wasn't right. And even then, the pediatrician missed it. The pediatrician didn't pick up on how sick this child was. And this is, I think, on a Wednesday. He goes to the pediatrician on Friday, and on Monday, he dies. And I wanted you to see this because if you think that doctors are going to pick up these kinds of problems clinically, I'm here to tell you that I have a lot of cases that demonstrate that they don't. And this is a very good example of where a kid probably would have had his life saved if they'd simply put a clip on his toe and measured his his oxygen saturation level when he was a newborn. This child would probably be alive, and these parents wouldn't be devastated like they are today. We'll see if this actually works. Dr. Grossfeld, do you have the mic? I mean,
So just watch. Here we go. If you just watch the motion of his chest, the normal respiratory rate for a baby at this age is about maybe 30, 35 times a minute.
What happened was what happened was that this child, the mom knew there was something wrong with him. He wasn't feeding well, he wasn't gaining weight, she didn't feel like he was normal. And so she took the child 2 days after this to the pediatrician. And when I looked at this, I was shocked. Because even I could see that his little chest is sort of heaving, and he just doesn't...
You see it kind of pulsating up and down. That's his respiratory effort.
And it just wasn't picked up. The child was sent home. They gave him some ointment for a rash, and on Monday she brought the child back, and they rushed him to the hospital, and it was too late. And if he had been taken to the hospital on Wednesday or even Friday when he was seen by the pediatrician, they could have done a cardiac surgery on this child, and this child would be here now. And so I show this to you only because I really want you to think about this screening for congenital heart defects thing, and bring it out to your community, because this is something that will be done. Every baby will get this screening eventually, but it won't be until people really advocate for this and make this happen. They're currently considering legislation to mandate this screening in many states now. It's now the law in New Jersey, which I find highly ironic, because hey, we're talking about where I'm from, baby. I'm telling you, that's where I'm from, and I am shocked that we're leading the way here. Governor Christie, of all people, signed this bill into law. I think it was to distract from when they were all over him because he had flown to his son's football game in a helicopter. So he figured he'd sign this bill the next day, to distract everybody. So Paul, how do I close this?
I didn't even tell you this, Chuck, but last week I was on service for the week at Children's here in San Diego, major medical center, with supposedly great prenatal care. Over a 4-day period of time, we had 5 babies come in distress with very severe congenital heart defects that had not been appreciated either through a prenatal ultrasound in some cases and were not detected by the pediatrician. So even in a world-class healthcare city like San Diego, these things are missed. And so I can't agree enough with Chuck's advocating for the pulse oximetry screening. And in fact, in California, that's going to be up in the November election, I think. So.
All right. Well,
What about something that says if they have a low oxygen for a couple of days, you should check the heart? Because that was not necessarily following at the hospital where our son was born. So he hung out on oxygen for 8 days before they checked the heart. He had the pulse ox.
We know
Viral pneumonia.
Well, that's because your son was at the hospital where all the famous Hollywood celebrities go, so.
He could possibly have a heart defect.
Which we rescued him out of.
Yeah, I know the story. I'm not going to name the hospital.
Cedars in LA.
Wait.
Again?
Cedars in LA.
If you're visiting LA, go to UCLA emergency room.
Children's Hospital Los Angeles saved his life. Who do I give this mic to? Why am I talking?
All right, we do have time for questions, so I'm just going to go around it, and we'll have Chuck introduce the second. Pardon? Okay, sure.
More of a comment, I guess, than a question, actually. Thank you for being here for starters. And just the suggestion, possibly, for thinking about the protocol is the possibility of adding on the protocol not to give the children medication that will decrease their platelet levels, because I can't tell you the number of times that we've gone to the emergency room with these, and they'll say, oh, well, we'll get her some Motrin. She can't take Motrin. So,
that is in the protocol now, the 11Q protocol.
yeah, because we've given that to them. They are,
Well, you're assuming they know how to read.
I know I saw that in here.
Actually, if I can chime in on another point that we discussed yesterday, from the perspective of the general pediatricians, and Chuck, I know you can concur with this, given the pressures, the financial pressures of trying to basically keep the finances afloat, I think all of you can appreciate, in a typical day, a general pediatrician in the office sees somewhere between 40 and 50 patients a day. Does that sound about right? And so that comes out to about 15 minutes. And common things happen commonly, and so there's sort of a mindset of wanting to ignore the inconvenient truth. That's just because we as pediatricians tend to be optimistic and don't like to hear about bad things in your children. And so there's this sort of psychology that, I've seen this happen many times. Chuck, I'm sure you can concur with this. If you have a concern about your 1-week-old baby, I can't tell you how many times I hear that the pediatrician or the nurse practitioner says something to the effect that, oh, it's nothing serious, it's fine, it's normal. And when they're rushed, 15 minutes, and there are 20 other kids in the waiting room, they tend to not heed that very well. And that's almost always the case in these malpractice lawsuits that I've seen, that the parents' concerns are not heeded. The case that Chuck described earlier about the little girl, Julia Summers, her mom is a surgical intensive care unit nurse. She knows GI bleeding. She sees it every day. She told that treating ER doctor, my daughter has a GI bleed, and it was ignored. So be persistent at the risk of offending the caretakers. If your child's life is on the line, don't worry about hurt feelings.
The 11Q protocol does say, in addition, any medications that impair normal platelet function, for example, ibuprofen, aspirin, should be avoided. So it is on there.
This question is kind of for both of you, because I haven't asked you yet. My daughter did have a low platelet count when she was born, and she had an open heart surgery and didn't require any blood transfusion. So she's going to have another surgery, and even though I really like this doctor, I felt like when I brought this up about the Paris Trousseau, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, you kind of dismissed it because she's had this other previous surgery, that she would be fine, you know.
That question has Dr. Grossfeld written all over it.
So your daughter had open heart surgery to close an atrial septal defect. Actually, she did get blood transfusions. And the reason why she did, when you go on cardiopulmonary bypass, you are getting transfused blood products. And so that's actually a very interesting and great point that, and I know of other cases kind of similar, reminiscent of this, where there was an unrecognized platelet disorder, actually a child with DeGeorge syndrome, where then the kid had spinal surgery and bled out and was paralyzed. And that kid had had open heart surgery and didn't bleed. The reason why is because you get platelets as part of the protocol for going on cardiopulmonary bypass. Okay, so the point is she doesn't need platelets, and she got them even though, and that's why she did one.
So, like, as part of this, so I don't know, I read the protocol, once, so I don't know if this is in there, but should there be any wording in there that says, do not assume because they've had previous surgeries without incidents? Anything to that effect, like do not, because I know this doctor said, well, she had surgery before and she was fine. So he's assuming that she would be fine again.
And that's why I'm saying that I think that you should have an individual protocol for your child, and that these kinds of questions are great. And so you would talk about that with Dr. Grossfeld, you would talk about that with your local doctor, and you would decide what things to put in your protocol that are relevant to your child.
Sorry, I know my wife asked me to ask you this question and then she leaves the room, so go figure. But
That's the definition of marriage right there.
So my question then is, would this protocol help in an instance where the insurance is denying a specific procedure or treatment that we think would be beneficial to our kid, and but yet the doctor's hesitant because the insurance doesn't cover it?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can't hurt. I mean, having a protocol like this, that talks about a specific thing that you want to do, certainly gives it the imprimatur of credibility that would help you in any argument with an insurance company. But my experience has been very little helps with insurance companies, to be honest with you. It certainly can't hurt. And if you're having a debate with somebody who's assessing whether the claim would be approved, I think that providing the protocol would be a good idea.
Can you advise us on, in relation to some of us that have the children that are over the age of 18?
Yes.
I currently have an advance directive that we set up with my daughter, saying that, you know, we make the decisions, because she's 23 chronologically, but mentally 8 to 10.
Right.
So, you know, really she's not going to know what's best. Is there something, is that adequate, or is there something more that we should be doing?
And is this relating specifically to medical care?
It's at the hospital, yeah.
Right.
What do I do when I travel?
Right. You mean, what do you do when you travel with her?
Yes.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, you can bring the advance directive with you. I mean, it's one of the things that you can do. But I do think it's adequate. I mean, if you have a properly prepared advance directive, again, that is a binding document. And, you know, most of you guys, and we don't have time to get into it now, and I don't know if Carrie or Mandy are going to touch on this at all, but, you know, a lot of you guys, one of the things that we could talk about in another meeting is the issue of the whole thing of advanced directives, estate planning, you know, how to take care of special needs kids, you know, in the long run, which I know is a very gnawing concern for all parents with kids with special needs. You know, it really does make sense to consult with an attorney who deals specifically with estate issues, and they are experts in all of that kind of stuff, living wills, advanced directives, estate planning, coming up with the kind of trust document that you would need to protect your child in the event that something happened to you. That's a whole nother subject area that is really important to families of kids with special needs. And you know, maybe the next meeting or something, I will do what I did at this meeting, which is correctly recognize that I don't know what I'm talking about in that area, and find somebody to talk to you guys that does know what they're talking about, which is what fortunately we did today. And you know, I'm about to introduce you to people that really do know what they're talking about in a subject that I'm excited to, you know, have them share with you.
I wanted to actually ask a question on behalf of one of the girls kind of here in the group today, but we talked about actually Emily's case and the concept that not all hospitals are one and the same when it comes to knowing how to treat children, particularly children with complex disorders. And so the question that was brought up is, if your child is in some sort of a crisis, not an absolute life-death crisis, in that case you just go to the nearest ER, there's not much alternative, but if your child needs to get relatively emergent care and you want that child to go to a tertiary care children's facility rather than your local neighborhood hospital by emergency medical transport. And if you don't know the answer, that's fine, but it's a question I think is very important. That is, what sort of leverage do families have to say, no, don't take my child to the local neighborhood, I need my child to go to Children's LA instead of the local doc in the box?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I really don't know. I mean, I know that situation has come up. I mean, have you had that situation come up?
We had that very situation. And the ambulance they called the ambulance from the doctor's office. I just wanted to take my child to the hospital because I had oxygen. They said no, since he needs more oxygen, you have to go in the ambulance. So they called the ambulance and they wanted to take him to the adult hospital. They didn't even know the way to the children's hospital. And so, but I said no. I just told him, I'm like, no, he cannot go there. He needs to go to the children's hospital. This is where all of his records are. This is where they know how to treat him. And they took me. I just had to sit in the front and give them directions.
From the legal aspect, I guess.
Yeah, just from a legal aspect, because I know I've seen situations where the EMTs are very adamant about saying, I'm sorry, our protocol is you have to go to hospital X because that's the closest hospital, even though hospital Y is where it needs to go.
That's what I've seen too. And in the Craig case in New Orleans, Mrs. Craig, who is a piece of work, you know, really, she's a tough lady, and they did the same thing to her, and she just made them leave, and she got in the car with her kid, and they took the child to the hospital they wanted to go to. But I really don't know, and it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I really don't know what legal recourse you have in terms of directing your child to a particular hospital. I know when it's come up, the EMTs claim they have protocols that they have to follow,
right.
and they don't want to negotiate about what hospital to go to. But I think like in a lot of things, I mean, I'm gonna look up that question. I think it's an interesting question. I think a lot of things in life, it just comes down to, being stubborn, and doing what's right for your kid and just not accepting what you think is not right. But
I was just going to say another kind of related issue. So if your child gets to that first local hospital, can you say, look, once they do an initial assessment, clearly my kid is sick, he needs to get to a higher level of care. You would hope that they would be receptive to that request, but what sort of leverage do families have to say, my kid needs to go to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and not...
Yeah, I don't know. It comes up all the time, but I don't know what your actual legal rights are. It's just sort of it's always been sort of a matter of negotiation.
Could you put it in the protocol, that this is where their primary treatment should be at?
Yeah, I mean,
That's a good start.
it's not, again,
Because you're traveling, but, I mean, if you're in town, right, and they want to,
If you're in town, I know if you're out of town, you can't really do that, but if you're in town, could you just have it in the protocol that they need to be at Children's Mercy, Kansas City?
Yeah, and that's going to have a lot of weight, again, if it's something signed particularly by a local physician that knows the area. But I'm sorry, I really don't know what the legal, what absolute right you have to demand to be taken to a particular hospital.
And, it's a sticky issue because if God forbid something happened, I could see this scenario where because it takes a little longer to get to the hospital of choice, and if something bad happens, then they're going to come back and say, had you taken your child to the closer hospital, that wouldn't have happened. So I'm sure it's a gray zone, but
Right.
I should go to the law school.
Well, I want to.
One more question, Jeremy,
And then we'll move on.
My question kind of is for both of you, I guess. From a cardiac standpoint, my daughter has hypoplastic left heart, so in the protocol letter, is there something that says not only going to a specific hospital, but also maybe going to the cardiac ICU, because with the case when she was just hospitalized in April, they almost put her on the floor, and then the question was, because she wasn't bad at the time, I mean, nobody, really thought much of it. They thought she was just dehydrated. But they said they were worried that she probably wouldn't have made it if she was on the floor because of that. So is that something we should put in the protocol with a congenital heart defect? Or
I can have a crack at that one if you want to add. It's an interesting process of how the decision is made when a child comes in, what level of care. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. Obviously, from the cardiologist standpoint, we always try to err on the side of being really conservative. And I'd rather have a child that you're not sure about start at a higher level of care than move them down. But for a variety of reasons, as you know, that's not always the case. So I think what I would say is that maybe, and Chuck could probably weigh in or how to incorporate that into the protocol, just to say that my child has a complex congenital heart defect whose condition can deteriorate very rapidly from one of seemingly mild symptoms to evolving into a life-threatening situation. And therefore, the highest level of care should be initiated initially until it's determined.
Right, in the metabolic disorder cases where that same situation is true, they will say that this child can deteriorate very rapidly, and strong consideration should be given to placing the child initially in an intensive care unit rather than on the floor or something like that. Obviously you can't anticipate every situation and you can't mandate certain things, but when you put that in there, at least it gives you a leg up if you're arguing that and they see that a doctor has said, it's very possible this child will decompensate quickly. Strong consideration should be given to placing the child here rather than there. And that's, again, my whole message today was individualized protocols. That might not be appropriate for somebody who doesn't have hypoplastic left heart. It might be something that should go in your protocol. And your protocol should be worked out with people that know what they're doing in advance, so you're not worrying about this when there's a crisis. I'm very excited to introduce to you the two young ladies to my left. I'm like the opening act here. You know, it's like when U2 tours, you know, and they have some guy who, you know, the crowd, you know, sort of half pays attention to and throws things at. That's my role here today. I'll tell you, 2 years ago when I came here, the families had a lot of questions about negotiating schools and things like that for kids with special needs. And it's not what I do, and I don't really know a lot about it, and I don't want to sit up here and pretend that I do. And so I said to Paul, this time we're not going to... For those of you on the live stream, Dr. Grosfeld just had an accident in the back. If you could get that on camera.
It's only my feet that are wet.
That's why we have him work on hearts and not water coolers. No, seriously, I really felt like you guys deserve to talk to somebody who really knew what they were doing about IEPs and about navigating the special needs, you know, morass with school systems. And so I really have a privilege of introducing you to Mandy Favaloro and Carrie Watts. Carrie is an advocate that, you know, extraordinaire for kids with special needs. Mandy is an attorney. They both are from Los Angeles. They were kind enough to come down last night so that they could speak to you. I asked them to come here because they're kind of like rock stars in the special education world, and I really am very pleased to introduce them to you, and I hope you'll ask them a lot of questions because they really know what they're talking about. Mandy, Carrie, thank you.